Take out your wallet. Don't worry, I won't steal your money. If you're a capitalist in this neoliberal age of ours, how would you turn whatever you have in your wallet into all of the money in the world? Not millions or billions of dollars. No. All of the money in the world. Let's say you have $1. You can, for example, buy, candy and sell it back to your nieces or nephews or younger siblings for $3. Yeah, that's pretty okay, I guess. But you want to make all of the money in the world. So what if instead of buying candy, you just lend them $1 so they can buy, what's popular with kids nowadays? Fortnite skins? Whatever that is? Yeah, sure, okay. You ask them to pay you back $1 each week for 3 weeks. And that's pretty okay too, right? I mean, you don't have to go to the store anymore. But we can do better. With that $1 you have, you can borrow, let's say, $10 with $2 interest. Now, you can finance more kids to buy Fortnite skins. So you find 11 of them, and you will earn $33 in 3 weeks. 33 minus $10 principal, $2 interest, and $1 initial capital. You'll make $20 from $1. That is a really good deal. But who wants to wait 3 weeks, right? You want the money now. Plus, some of those kids will probably not be able to pay you back. So what you can do is package all of those debts into a single financial instrument and sell it below its return value. So, for example, that $33 worth of financial instrument, you can sell it for $30 and still make $17 out of a single dollar. Hey, and plus, you get the money now. And now you can use your $18 to borrow more money and repeat the whole process all over again. Of course, some of the people you sold your financial instruments to will lose money because some of those kids won't be able to pay back their debt. But who gives a shit about them? You're a capitalist bastard. All you care about is making all of the money in the world. But then you see something interesting. Some of those creditors start talking to the kids' parents, asking for some sort of insurance just in case their kids can't pay back the debt. Like, the creditors would approach the parent, telling them they will give the parents 10 cents a week, and in return, if their kids can't pay back the debt, the parents would cover the whole thing. And because every parent thinks their child is really, really responsible, they would probably take it. I mean, it's only 30 cents, but hey, money is money, right? And this gives you another idea. You can, technically, do this without lending to a kid first. Like, you can approach a parent with debtor kids and tell them, hey, I'll give you $100 each week for 3 weeks, and if your kids fail to pay their debt, you give me $1,000. And since money is money, and they think their child is really, really responsible, the parents will probably say, yeah, sure. So what do? Well, you borrow more money, find kids least able to pay their debts with really, really trusting parents, wait until the kids default on their debts, and collect the money from the parents. And you can keep doing this over and over again until you have all of the money in the world. Yay! Is this a silly example? Well, not really. I mean, it's actually why the 2008 financial crisis got really, really bad. Except instead of kids and parents, it's consumer and insurance companies owing a mountain of debt without having the assets or income to pay for it. And it's actually still how most money in the world are made nowadays. Not through industrial production or resource extraction, but through complicated financial instruments betting on literally anything you want on God's green earth. I mean, a full 20% of American economy is made up of non-productive sector like finance, insurance, and real estate, which are just skimming money off the top of everything else. Debt has become the normal way to conduct any business, and people are driven to go into debt to live a normal life. The financial market have used the money of one specific class of people and trap everyone else with it. Debt has become a controlling apparatus of the capitalist class, using the ethos of personal responsibility of neoliberalism to make sure people bend to the will of the market. And everything becomes interconnected through debt, and if one part of it falls hard enough, the whole thing can crumble to dust. How did we get here? Well, for that, you would have to thank Let me steal a phrase from a more famous YouTuber, Peter Coffin. Neoliberalism is the fetishization of the free market. That is such an elegant way to put it, and it's quite correct. Neoliberalism does fetishize the free market, in the sense that the free market becomes this sort of holy, sacred thing that should be embodied in literally everything. But why the free market? Why not fetishize something better, like equity or equality? What lies beneath the belief in the free market? Okay, so let's start with the very basic assumption of neoliberalism, that the free market is the most efficient way to distribute resources and wealth. As such, governments should only intervene when propping up the almighty free market and help it spread all over the globe. But there are two hidden assumptions here. First, there is an acceptance of economic Darwinism. That is the belief that whoever is on top got there because they're the smartest, bestest, richest, or whatever. And the free market decides how much a person is valued based on how much profit they can generate for the capitalist class. Those who are deemed not valuable is then thrown into the fringes of the market. And because government interventions that benefit the workers warp the market, they are not kosher under neoliberalism. So stuff like privatization and austerity is good, while welfare, unions, and worker protections are bad. Second, neoliberalism asserts that the economy should be as efficient as possible, instead of as equitable as possible for everyone. Efficient in this context usually means making as much profit as possible, and that will lead to a richer world. And again, that's sort of true. The world, on average, is richer because the rich gets uber mega richer, while everyone else only gets a meager gain if they get any at all. See, here's the thing though. These two assumptions don't actually aim to describe how the world is, but rather how the world should be. To quote Simon Clark, the point for neoliberalism is not to make a model that is more adequate to the real world, but to make the real world more adequate to its model. This is not merely an intellectual fantasy. It is a very real political project. Neoliberalism has conquered the commanding heights of global intellectual, political, and economic power, all of which are mobilized to realize the neoliberal project of subjecting the whole world's population to the judgment and morality of capital. And it succeeded. Neoliberalism has actually restructured the whole world, not just economically either, from the very foundation of what it means to be a human to how we interact with others, the state, and capital. Everything has been reshaped to fit the neoliberal model. To quote Ronaldo Monk, while production under the old industrial capitalism had served as a marker of identity and class divisions, now consumption came to the fore. Clearly, consumption in the new global market serves a vital economic need. But it also makes for a cultural restructuring of society. The whole consumer process, from conception to sale, through advertising, marketing, and fashion building, has fragmented identities and made them more fluid as consumption is continuously revolutionized. I mean, this is pretty self-evident, right? You probably saw thousands of ads yesterday telling you how you should spend your money, telling you to consume, trying to shape your identity with pre-built norms and values that they chose for you, which in a couple of years might be outdated because new trends might reformulate these norms and values. If you move up a level, neoliberalism has also changed how we interact with one another. Now, the main thrust of social interactions is competition. Who has the most likes or retweets or share or whatever. People are socially incentivized to be the best consumer they can be by consuming stuff that reinforces their identity in the eyes of others. The gaming community is especially bad with this, with people trying to one-up one another, trying to prove who the real gamer is. We can go up another level. Neoliberalism has also successfully restructured governments. Instead of representing the people, their main goals now revolve around establishing and propping up the free market, and making sure transnational corporations are represented and allowed to operate as smoothly as possible. This required the deregulation of financial capital, and finance became the most important and influential sector of the economy. I think this is really important, so I'll come back to this later. We can yet move up another level. Neoliberalism has also changed how we interact with the people of the world in general. Now, the international working classes are made to compete against one another globally. This breeds resentment, not against the capitalist class, mind you, but against other workers in other countries. That's why some jackass can blame China for underemployment. And also, the ideas from a hegemonic culture like the free market or consumer choice have become the very foundation of societies globally, while other cultures are sold on the market as yet another identity for people to consume after being watered down and removed of radical elements. And, at the very top, neoliberalism has also changed how we interact with the physical world itself. Because competition is the only thing, justifications are made to extract every single resources necessary to get ahead. I mean, Jesus Christ, the world is goddamn burning down because the very foundation of our economic system requires us to race to the bottom. These structural transformations of society in every level are required for neoliberalism to work. The free market forces people to compete against one another at every single level of existence. Policies that promote the reproduction of neoliberalism in the global south are pushed by the IMF and the World Bank. Ideas like unions are bad, which has resulted in declining union membership, or customer is always right, which reinforces consumerism, have been systematically proliferated through the media. And it succeeds because neoliberalism has become the default economic theory taught in schools all over the world. So how did this transformation happen? Well, let's talk about. Let's start with the global north. Okay, so there were two events that underpinned the structural global economic transformation into neoliberalism. The collapse of the Bretton Woods system, better known as the gold standard, and the 1973 oil crisis. Now, the Bretton Woods system is too complicated to be fleshed out in detail in this video, but to keep it brief, its collapse caused the international economy to be really volatile. And then we have the oil crisis of 1973, which was caused by the Yom Kippur War. I'm not going to touch that topic, even if I have 10-foot pole held by your mom. But suffice to say, after the global north decided to support Israel in that war, Gulf states proclaimed an embargo against the supporters of Israel. This caused oil prices to increase significantly, which led to high inflation and high unemployment, also known as stagflation, in Western countries. But it wasn't the stagflation that compelled the government to act. Oh no, it was falling rate of profit for the capitalist class that did it. And surprise, surprise, that part was unacceptable. But there was a problem. The previous hegemonic theory, Keynesian economic theory, with its extensive systems of welfare provision, dealing with healthcare, unemployment benefits, education, and housing, could not solve the problem. To quote people smarter than I am, official Keynesianism was destroyed by the crisis that followed the first oil shock of 1973 to 74. The persistent combination of high unemployment and high inflation proved impervious to the scientific economic interventions of the major capitalist states. Even worse, increases in public expenditure led to persistent government deficits and appeared to exacerbate the phenomena of global crisis. Profitability collapsed in the mid-1970s, and the price system across several developed countries was severely disrupted, especially through rapid and persistent inflation. The institutions that sustained the post-war boom faced intolerable pressure, none more so than the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was put in abeyance in 1971 and finally collapsed in 1973. Neoliberalism arose as government reaction to the economic disasters of the second half of the 1970s. In terms of economic policy, its fundamental and longer-lasting component was the abandonment of interventionism that aimed at full employment. Did you catch that last part? During Keynesian era, one of the goals of the fiscal and monetary policies is the lowest possible unemployment level. This was changed to what Milton Friedman called the natural rate of unemployment after neoliberalism took hold and became the hegemonic theory. This essentially created the political justification for unemployment to rise to the natural level and, in turn, reduce workers' bargaining power, thus making the free market more efficient but less equitable. Also, when businesses couldn't grow their profit, what do? Well, they would either need to get more customers or cut costs, or both. Unions got in the way of slashing costs because workers with bargaining power are expensive workers, so that had to go. Capital control, defined here as government control of the flow of money from one country to another, got in the way of expanding to new international market, so that had to go. Welfare made workers less dependent on the capitalist class, so that too had to go.
And so on and so on.
Essentially, capital needed to look for new markets to expand to and cheaper labor to exploit. Which brings us to the global south. After World War II, most developing countries in the global south adopted the strategy of import substitution industrialization. In short, this is a protectionist policy aimed at protecting growing domestic industries from competitions abroad, with stuff like import tariffs along with Keynesian welfare programs. After oil price rose due to the embargo, Gulf states got a big cash windfall and would like to park their money somewhere safe and profitable, like for example in developing countries. So developing countries started to borrow a lot of money through the European financial market to fund their growing industries. And everything was going fine and developing countries were actually growing nicely until the US increased their interest rate, which meant borrowing became more expensive. Eventually, developing nations weren't able to pay back the debts and were forced to take loans from the IMF. These loans came with the so-called Structural Adjustment Program, which essentially forced them to open their domestic market to foreign companies, along with scrapping social programs and employment rights. You know, standard neoliberal stuff. And, surprise, surprise, this made their economy worse and led to economic crisis after economic crisis. But it was extremely profitable for transnational companies looking for cheap labor and new markets. And the removal of capital control forced by neoliberalism also increased the risk of currency manipulation by speculators. How this works is way beyond the scope of this video, so there's a whole reading list in the description if you want to know more about it. This rampant currency speculation led to financial market crashes in Mexico in 1995, in East and Southeast Asia in 1997, in Russia in 1998, in Turkey in 2001, and in Argentina in 2002. And oh, also, let's not forget the 2008 financial crisis. You can thank neoliberal ideas of unregulated market for that. Specifically, the financial market. As I said earlier in the video, 20% of US economy, the largest share of it in fact, is made up of financial, insurance, and real estate, or FIRE, sector. Other developed countries have similar percentage too. This sector makes up the very top of the capitalist structure, so let's talk about Most, if not all, analysts on the left now agree that neoliberalism is the ideological expression of the reassertion of the power of finance. The term itself, finance, refers to a framework of institutions interlocked in a complex network. Behind these institutions stand individuals. Although it may not be easy to outline the contours of this entity, in particular in relation to the development of pension and mutual funds, the new leadership of the upper and active fraction of finance is quite conspicuous since the end of 1970s. The rise of real interest rates is obviously favorable to lenders. The new global distribution of production is clearly directed by large banks. The stock market is center stage. The managers of corporations are compelled to target their activity even more strictly than before towards maximizing the market value of corporations and the distribution of large fraction of profits as dividends. All these features of contemporary capitalism point to the crucial position of finance at the center of the new neoliberal setting. Do you know how most developed countries make their money? You might guess, I don't know, heavy industries or tech companies. But no, the largest sector in most developed countries is the FIRE sector, or finance, insurance, real estate, rent, and lease, which I know should be called FIRE, but that doesn't have a nice ring to it, so FIRE will do. Now, how does the FIRE sector makes its money, if you boil it down? Essentially, it's just parking some money in assets, whether that be securities, real estate, or arcane financial instruments like collateralized debt obligation, bespoke tranche opportunity, interest rate swap, or credit default swap, with the hope that those assets will increase in value at some point in the future. But where does that value come from? Well, finance industry essentially double dips into the economy. First, financial instruments take a portion of companies' profits through dividends and bonds, and second, they also take a portion of everyone else's wages through debt repayment. And the FIRE sector is ridiculously profitable. Because of that, if you want to make the big bucks, you gotta go to that sector. This has two effects. First, this means only people who already have money can meaningfully participate in the market. I mean, sure, some working class people do have investment in stocks and such, but the amount of money they get in return is next to nothing. Second, this means most accumulated capital, that is, the wealth that rich people have stashed from exploiting the labor of others, will tend to flow towards the FIRE sector because, again, it's more profitable than other sectors. That capital then flows to consumers in the Western world, growing enterprises in the Global South, and transnational corporations. See, because transnational corporations are so gigantic, growing them, which is absolutely necessary to exist under capitalism, is extremely difficult. So what do? Well, simple. Merge with other companies, whether that be companies in their supply chain or their competitors. This is called leverage buyout, which essentially means borrowing an ungodly amount of money to buy other corporations. But the thing is, though, those businesses won't be able to reinvest their profit because most of it goes to debt repayment, the investors and the financiers. So if they want to expand their businesses, which again is absolutely required in capitalism, they would have to borrow more money, repeat ad infinitum, until all of the money in the world is controlled by the financial market. And that's why, dear viewer, the FIRE market is fucking booming. Everyone needs it, and nobody can escape it. Its share of the global economy is still increasing, even after the 2008 financial crisis, which was directly caused by the FIRE sector going rampant. I mean, banks are still the most profitable sector out there. 5 of the most profitable companies in the world are all banks. And even crazier, do you know how much financial assets are traded in the shadow banking sector? That is, outside of regular banking, insurance, pension funds, and public financial institutions? In 2016, it was $99 trillion. and that's only 30% of all financial assets. To put it in perspective, the world's total GDP in 2018 was $84 trillion. Does that make sense to you? I mean, how does this work? Well, do you remember the example at the beginning of the video? It's that, but multiplied by the whole world. Except we have real people, not kids. People who are so burdened by debt that they have to take another loans to pay back their old debt. And these loans kept snowballing and snowballing until there's more debt than actual income. And then we have financial institutions making side bets on those debts with futures, swaps, and so many other financial hocus pocus that don't really add anything to society but just suck money from everyone else to the very top. And the exploitation is not localized in the global south anymore. In the liberal tradition, this 21st century debt imperialism is multicultural and global. The interest payment of an American might go to China. In Malaysia, it might go to Japan. Canada to Singapore. The UK to Russia. Indonesia to India. And so on and so on. While it is true that the most exploited labor in the world is still in the global south, capitalists of the global south are now also exploiting both the working class of the global north and the global south through debt. Let's take a look at one case study, the 2008 financial crisis, which I have mentioned like a billion times in this video. Now, crazy-ass financial instruments did make it a lot worse, but it's not the main cause of the crisis. See, in the 2000s, Asian economies, especially China, were growing quite rapidly because the West was buying probably a literal mountain of really cheap Asian goods. This led to a massive trade deficit in the West, and that money went to the capitalist class of Asia. So now they're sitting on a mountain of cash, and what do you do with a mountain of cash? Well, you put it back in the financial market in the West to earn interest. So the Asian capitalist class injected an unholy amount of money into the financial market in the West. This drove up the demand for securities that were deemed safe, like home mortgages. With really high demand, the banks started to do shady shit like giving loans to people without checking whether they could pay it back, and eventually, enough people stopped paying their mortgages, and the price of real estate cratered, thus starting the 2008 financial crisis. And that capital flow is still going on to this day. Nowadays though, rather than home mortgages, it's literally everything else. Household debt to income ratio in the US isn't as bad as it was in 2008, but it's still really high at 86%. And some of that interest payments from household debts go all over the world, including to the capitalist class of the global south. So if you ever wonder why wealth inequality got this bad, well, this is it. An unholy amount of money keeps getting sucked to the capitalists at the top of the world. And it's not being used to do anything productive, but consume expensive and indulgent shit like billion-dollar yacht, or billion-dollar apartment, or golden pizza, or other stupid bullshit like that. And then you have transnational corporations, which are merging left and right, becoming virtually monopolistic, while governments all over the world let it happen. Actually, no, it's even worse than that. Governments have been complicit in this. Neoliberalism is so hegemonic that most politicians think this is actually good. This, my dear viewer, is the highest form of capitalism. Finance capital running rampant, shaping the very foundation of the society by imposing imperialism through debt, both in the global south and global north. If it seems like I'm defending capitalism by showing how its cousin neoliberalism is way worse, I assure you I am not. Mostly because neoliberalism is not capitalism's cousin, or sibling, or child even. No, neoliberalism is capitalism's natural progression. Neoliberalism is like the Charmander to industrial capitalism's Charizard. Or, however that Pokemon works, I don't know, because I'm way too old for this analogy anyways. As I've said earlier, capitalism will always need to expand to new markets and cut costs. Neoliberalism is nothing but the natural progression of that. After capital ran out of room to grow in the domestic market, where does it go? After capital can't cut costs anymore by producing goods domestically, what does it do? Well, move production to other countries, of course, ones with untapped market and cheap labor. To convince the world they needed to do it, neoliberalism reshaped global economies and cultures through any means necessary. Toppling governments, shoving debt down everyone's throats, spreading the hegemonic culture through media, and so on and so on. Of course, some of the people in the global south ended up really wealthy from this economic restructuring, which gave them the power to exploit the working class of the global north, sucking their surplus value side by side with the local capitalist class. And then we have transnational corporations trying to expand every year, or else they will fail to repay their debt that was incurred to expand in the first place. Their valuations on the stock market become a benchmark of success, and they need to do everything in their power to increase their stock prices every year, use loopholes to pay zero taxes, lay off workers, automate more and more of their production line, buy up their competitors, literally anything and everything to cut costs and increase revenue. Otherwise, they go bankrupt. That is why, and Jesus Christ help me because what I'm going to say next will probably piss off a lot of people, bringing back Keynesian policies won't probably, possibly, maybe help in the long run. Rebuilding the welfare state might help in the short term, but the economic structure of the world is so radically different than how the world was 50 years ago. Plus, we have an incoming environmental catastrophe, and any form of capitalism won't solve that. Actually, it will make it worse. So we need to maybe build another economic model that's both globally equitable and environmentally sustainable. But you know what can do that? Socialism, but like international and sustainable socialism. International eco-socialism even. That sounds good, right? How do we get there? At the end of last video, I said I was going to talk about UBI or fascism, and I lied. I changed my mind, and I talk about neoliberalism instead. But next video, I'm not going to talk about UBI or fascism. I'm actually going to talk about how we can collapse capitalism and my criticism of the left in general. So, you know, that should be fun. Not controversial at all. So stay around, subscribe, like, all that stuff. Check out my Twitter, I guess. I don't know. I'll see you later.